So today's video and presentation is about Against the Odds, the $100 million grant case study, really deconstructing what are the keys to success in this very long shot proposal that we had. So that is the core thing that you can learn today, is learning from this very against long odds $10 million proposal that we put together, and many of the failures I had leading up to that. It wasn't like I just sort of got to a point where I was like submitting this big proposal with my collaborators and we just got it from out of the blue. No, it was a long path, a long journey, and I'm going to describe some of the key elements of that journey to you so you can learn from it. And really, this was a long shot thing with many limiting factors that I'll go into more detail of in a few moments. But the key point of this part is that it was a really hard to get proposal that we were able to get in the end, and I'm going to show you how we did that. So the story that I'm telling here may sound pretty far out, being able to do this against these long odds, but we've actually got a capture directly from the reporter.nih.gov, the NIH reporter site here, that shows that funding on this line highlighted here and this line here. These are just the first 2 years of funding that are shown, I believe. This says 5, so, oh yeah, '02. Yeah, so the first 2 years. Now, I dropped out of the consortium after that to focus full-time on my work with other researchers on their grant proposals. So it won't show years 3 through 5 of this funding for me, but it will, if you look at my collaborators, it shows years 3 through 5, all the way 1 through 5 for my collaborators. So my point is, in this era, when you never know what's true and what's not true, I mean, it's kind of hard out there. I get it. I just wanted to show you, you can go check this yourself very easily. All right, so why should you even listen to me? If you don't know me, if you haven't encountered me before, here's just a very, very brief set of information about me, and we'll go into more detail of my story in a bit. But from 2002 through 2010, I started as a brand new assistant professor in 2002 at UNC Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And during that time, I secured 4 R01s, an RC2 Grand Opportunities Award that yielded about $1.8 million of direct costs, NSF funding, and a large U24, which is the subject of the case study today. So in the first 10 years, I secured basically over $16 million of funding in my first 10 years, starting out as a fresh assistant professor at UNC Chapel Hill. So it's, kind of a surprising thing for somebody just starting out to be able to accomplish that much in 10 years. And I was peripherally involved in other proposals as well. So let me just see one thing. Okay. And today we'll talk about how I did the biggest chunk of that. And if you want the examples I show, I'll provide a link at the end to download the resources in the resources section of the talk. So the real goal here is to help you learn from my mistakes and my failures, because again, I had many of them. And one of those failures is that, or one of the learning lessons from those failures is that I learned to do certain things, and that led to that success, to the track record that I just talked about briefly. And it took me years of working with clients, helping my clients write grant proposals and accomplish bigger feats with their grant proposals, to really understand the significance of some of the subtle, subconscious things I was doing. Because they weren't, they were just things that I did, that I learned to do, and I did them, and I'm like, well, isn't this what everybody does? But they were things that were making the difference. And this is one of the problems with many mentors that I just want to point out, because, You may have mentors or mentor other people, and one of the big challenges with mentorship is that so many of us who are successful and then try to mentor other people to our success just say, well, do it this way, do it the way I did it, without understanding the true nuances of what we were doing that this person that we're mentoring may not actually know how to do. And we don't know how to make that thing explicit to teach them how to do that. And it's actually surprisingly difficult. It's taken me years to make those implicit things explicit. And that's part of what I'm also trying to do for you here today, is make much more of that worked explicit and clear so that you can learn from it and follow that. Okay, and let's see if I can actually change the slide. I am trying to change the slide. There we go. Okay, so what I learned looking back, and that you can learn from as well, it's really about how to save time and reduce rejections, how to improve your clarity and excitement, how to increase your creativity, which is a big core of everything that we're doing in this process. Grants are a creative process, whether you consider yourself creative or not. And I didn't used to consider myself particularly creative, which is kind of weird looking back on, but I didn't consider myself creative. And yet we are really doing a creative effort in writing a grant proposal. And it needs to be a creative effort that ends up ultimately impressing your reviewers and funders. And how to get the funding that you need with more confidence. And you'll also learn why focusing on your audience instead of perfect writing actually makes much bigger difference than perfect writing does. The key to developing standout proposals without getting caught in endless revisions. And I've done a lot of the endless revisions thing, or near endless, not quite endless, because if they were truly endless, I would still be doing them. Why strong preliminary data isn't the golden ticket and what is instead. So, getting results quickly can be a long process. So I'm going to tell you in this case story about how we accomplished a very big result in a very short period of time. But I want to give a prelude to that it was about 9 years of work, of learning how to do this process better and better, that led up to being able to do this in a very short period of time. So the point I'm making here is that if you want to get great results quickly in your grant proposals, you can't just do it right away. It is a skill that has to be learned over time and developed over time. And I love this quote. I heard it years ago. The slow way is the fast way. It sounds contradictory, but it's actually not contradictory. With grant writing, I have seen this with clients over and over again, that the more we take our time and slow down and focus on what truly matters and develop the skills and the techniques around what really matters, and take the time to do that, invest that time up front, the faster we get to our ultimate goals of funding, and repeatable funding, not just one time, one hit wonder kind of funding. So the slow way is the fast way. And just so you know, I also have to do a little disclaimer, since I don't know you, you don't really know me that well so far. Hopefully you'll get to know me better through this. And so the disclaimer is, I'm going to present something that was a pretty miraculous feat that we accomplished. And I don't expect anybody listening to be able to repeat that, especially not from just listening to one lesson here. It took years of practice and being in the right place at the right time with the right kind of science to make this happen. So it was very unique. So I don't expect anybody to be able to repeat this, and I'm not claiming that. But what I am claiming is that you can learn from this experience to help with even your everyday proposals, to make those easier, to make those resonate with reviewers better, and to make the process faster and more direct. So that is what I am claiming, and hopefully you'll see that 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 could be the case as we get into this. So I think I'm done with sort of the prelude parts. And now we're going to talk about a decade that I spent in my career working on these various grant proposals, because it's, again, this accomplishment that I'm sharing with you isn't about just what we did in that short period of around 45 days. It was about what I did during those 10 years and all of that time leading up to that. So I won't take 10 years to share this with you. At least, I hope not. Hopefully it'll be much quicker than that. So we do have a little prelude to the story, which is the postdoc years leading into the start of my faculty job. So in this prelude, I really came into the faculty job after the postdoc thinking I had grants mastered. And the reason I thought that is because I had achieved getting this prestigious K22 Genome Scholar Award as a postdoc. So that K22 award gave me 2 years of funding as a postdoc, where I was actually able to hire staff as a postdoc to work under my supervision in my postdoc advisor's lab. So it was kind of a weird situation where I was reporting to the postdoc advisor and then I had employees reporting to me. So it kind of threw everybody bureaucratically for a loop, but it was cool to be a postdoc with funding. And that funding carried into the start of my faculty job. And it also probably helped me get a lot of faculty job offers having that. So as a result, I thought, hey, I got this covered. I know this grant stuff. I've already got this prestigious grant. I know what I'm doing. And so I'll go right in and start applying for grants at UNC and I'll be fine. Okay. Then I actually started my tenure track job at UNC. And again, I need to get funding ASAP was my attitude. And as the title of part 1 shows, constant rejection was the result of this. So the time frame, this is spanning a time frame of 3 years. And I'm just including these time frames in these different parts so that you understand when I distill it all down to core lessons, it wasn't like I learned these things immediately. It took quite a bit of time to learn these things and make the necessary shifts in my approach to really get different results. But let's start with the rejection, which was not so good. So there were 6 major federal grant efforts, including some solo and collaborative efforts, R01, R21, several efforts at a PO1 style. It wasn't a PO1 itself. It was like a different kind of project grant. It was, I just don't remember the specific number. And so multiple grants in here, as well as several NSF award attempts, all rejected, with scores getting worse and worse. And this period ended with this R21 that I'm mentioning being triaged. It was my first triage. And those who aren't familiar with what that word means, triage, in the NIH, National Institutes of Health grant review process, when grants are received and they're assigned to reviewers, reviewers are asked to look at the proposals that they have to review and decide which of these proposals are worth the time of the whole panel, the whole study section, to come together and discuss this proposal, spend the time of the whole panel to discuss it, versus which ones just aren't even close enough. They're not even in the in the ballpark, and so they're not worth taking the time to discuss. So we'll just give them some brief feedback, those people, those applicants, and they'll be on their way. And we won't spend time as reviewers, I'm talking as the NIH right now, we won't waste time as NIH and NIH reviewers like discussing it. So that's what triage is. And this was my first triage. Things were getting worse and worse. They were going downhill. I was going to colleagues, trying to get advice, getting little tidbits of advice here and there. I went to a couple short grant writing workshops at my university. None of it was helping, okay? It was getting worse and worse, and I was getting more and more desperation. So it was rejection and desperation began to set in. The only funding that I got during that period was a small NSF grant that was actually written by a colleague, and I was just a collaborator on that, and a very modest internal pilot grant. It was under $20K that I got from that. That's it. That was not enough to support this lab with 3 full-time staff members, and I think at that point I had 1 student and another one thinking of joining, and I believe I was also recruiting for postdocs or wanting to recruit for postdocs. I couldn't do it without getting more funding. So here are the things that didn't work. And sometimes this is a more important lesson than the things that do work and did work. But let's start with the things that didn't work because I see so many people doing some of these same things. So one of my attitudes and therefore approaches at the time was, well, all I need is some tweaks. Like, I've mostly got this. I'm a pretty good writer. So I've mostly got this. I just need to figure out, like, the 1 or 2 little things I'm doing wrong and just do those better and it'll all fix everything. No, like what that was really about is I was avoiding deep feedback because I thought, well, deep feedback, this is subconsciously, deep feedback's going to be kind of a pain in the butt. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to, my ego doesn't want to deal with it because I think I'm pretty good at this. And I don't want to take the time to do that. I'm good enough. So I thought I could just find, after the first rejection or 2, I acknowledged, okay, well, maybe something is wrong here. But I thought I could just find that magic tweak, that magic method and store it away in my mind and then use it on my next grant proposal and it would result in success. But no, it didn't happen. The reviewers very clearly told me I was wrong, that 6 major rejections in a row showed me it wasn't working. Okay, so the just need tweaks, it's not a successful attitude for this. I just want to go back to that for a second. At this point in time, getting major federal grants from NIH, from NSF, or if you're in another country from, let's say, CIHR in Canada, this is a professionals-only sport. A professionals-only sport. I've, in the past, shared the analogy with basketball. When basketball was invented, and I'm blanking on the name of the guy who invented basketball, but when it was invented, it was all amateurs. It was all amateurs. And anybody could join the game and play at the highest level because there was no real high level. But over time, if you have observed the sport of basketball, the people who are elite players, pro players now, they're so far beyond what everybody else is doing who are just playing it as a hobby, playing it for fun. The exact same thing has happened with grants. In my father's era, so my father was a chemical researcher, like chemical separations researcher, and in his era, from the 1950s through the 90s, it was mostly a hobbyist sport in the sense that almost anybody could write a proposal, and with good data and good science, you could submit enough times and respond to reviewer critiques, and you could get funding. But it has really changed, especially after the doubling of the federal budget here in the United States for science in the Clinton years, in the 1990s. All of these universities really did a lot of growth based upon that, grew the faculty substantially, and it just became more and more competitive, especially when the doubling turned off and actually budgets started shrinking. It became hyper competitive. People have become more and more expert at it. And so if you're just in there thinking, like, I can be a hobbyist at this and just, learn from a short workshop or 2, or learn from a little short class I took as a graduate student, enough that I need to know to compete at this professionals level, I think you might be unfortunately disappointed, as I was very disappointed when I got all these rejections. So okay. Now I need to change the slide again. Okay. So I just don't have time to start early is another thing that I was believing. I don't have time to start early. Like, I've got all of these things going on. I'm starting up a lab. And so I would typically wait until about 3 weeks before the deadline to get into the writing. It was a very common pattern for me. Maybe it was 4 weeks, I would sort of start thinking about writing and sort of getting the ducks in a row. 3 weeks, really start writing, lots of late nights. And, before that, I would tell myself I'm too busy to get started on this. There were problems with my prioritization, and I never found that good way to start early. There were just always fires to put out, it seemed like, and I couldn't seem to get that grant writing started. And so it would just be the kind of thing where when it got to about 3 weeks, I'm like, oh, I really do have to write this or it's not going to even get done. Maybe you've experienced some of this. I've certainly talked to a lot of clients over the years who have this same issue, and it really was not helping me at all. It was a big part of the problem that I was having. Another one of the problems is this idea that I just need to keep submitting proposals until I get funding. There was an attitude in my department at the time, amongst many people, of just if you're not getting funding, just submit more. Just submit more. And eventually, you'll win the lottery. That was kind of the attitude. And I understand that from one perspective, that, if it is even odds, the more tickets for the lottery that you buy, the higher chances you have of winning. The problem with that thinking is that things aren't even odds, that actually quality does matter. It's just like in basketball. Basketball is a great example again, because in the game of basketball or in any sport like that, there are random things that happen. There is random chance. People can have bad days, they can miss their shots, they can, all sorts of random things can happen. But over time, the best teams have a higher percent chance of winning, much higher percent chance of winning than the worst teams. So there is a substantial difference. The odds are very biased according to the quality of the team. The same thing is true with grant proposals. So yeah, you can just buy tickets, but if your odds are remote, those are very expensive tickets if you have to spend weeks or months of time putting together a proposal and sacrificing your reputation in the process, because eventually those reviewers on those study sections or review panels are going to get tired of seeing the same old worn out ideas from the person yet again after they've rejected it. I mean, I've heard stories of one person, several people actually, who've submitted over 20 proposals before they got a single one funded. And just think about those reviewers of the 20 plus proposals that weren't funded and what they think about your reputation after that. It's not good. It's not pretty. So we want to bias the odds in our favor, and then we can keep submitting. But first, let's get that quality in and get those odds to the best point we can get them before just, doing this sort of grant spamming is what I've called it in the past, because that's exactly the mode that I was in. I've been there. I've done the grant spamming, and it wasn't good. It really wasn't good. And the result for me was a constant cycle of stress and ill-conceived submissions. So another one of these is the write first, think never approach. Now, you may say, wait, okay, writing is thinking, right? So if you were writing something, you were thinking. This is a very common saying that I've heard over and over again from people. And there's an interesting response to that I recently realized, which is, okay, maybe writing is thinking, but is it actually quality thinking? Is it good thinking? And the answer that I came up with to that is no, not necessarily. It certainly wasn't in the case of those proposals I submitted during this period of time. Yes, I was thinking things through on the page. Okay, great. Well, but were those things that reviewers actually wanted, that funders actually cared about? No, because I hadn't thought through that. So it wasn't really the right approach. We need to turn this around and think first and then write later. Think first, write later. That's the real motto of this, although I'm getting ahead of myself in this story. So it really resulted in poorly defined proposals with unclear big ideas. And we'll get into what is this thing of big ideas in a bit. Okay, so maybe you experienced one or more of these things. It turns out that these are quite common in my work with clients over the years, after I left the tenured faculty job. I've worked with people for years now, and these are super common for people to buy into these. And there are more. I just didn't want to list them all and make this super, super long. So it's very common. And the result of these and the others is rejection and dejection. I actually got at the point in this phase where instead of wanting to hire postdocs, I was thinking I might have to let some of these staff members go, because who cares about tenure? The tenure decision is still years down the road. But right now, like having to go face this person and tell them, well, you're laid off, you've got a pink slip. That was what I was really fretting about. So I had a big black cloud over my head, and it was really affecting my personal life and everything. And finally, a key to this is I decided I had to do something completely different. Not just little tweaks, not just minor changes. I had to do something completely different to try to change this around. And fortunately, that worked. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. So here are a few key points from this phase 1 that you can take home. I followed conventional wisdom and my own ego to produce exactly diddly squat. And if you haven't heard that old-fashioned expression, diddly squat basically means nothing, zero, zilch, nada. Okay? So conventional wisdom is usually wrong. That's another key sort of take-home that I have learned over the years, is that at the time, I was just listening to all of this sort of conventional wisdom floating around in my department amongst various random colleagues who had different thoughts about the grant process. And most of it turned out, as I learned over the years later, most of it turned out to be wrong. Because, look, if only 1 in 10 grants are funded, 1 in 10 of the proposals submitted are actually funded, that means that there are 9 that aren't, and the 9 are the ones that are typically following the conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom doesn't improve your odds. It's going beyond conventional wisdom, going deeper, getting better, standing out. Do you think, in terms of back to the basketball analogy, that somebody like Michael Jordan, a player like Michael Jordan, it sort of dates me a little bit, but that Michael Jordan was just following conventional wisdom to become one of the best basketball players of all time? No way. No way. Michael Jordan has had his own unique excellence that he brought onto the court, and so do all other elite players. So we have to do the same thing in grant writing. We have to bring our own unique excellence into it, not just follow pat and easy sounding conventional wisdom. But I kept looking for the quick and easy fix, and I did not find it. And unfortunately, I've tried, for my clients, I really want my clients to succeed when I work with them. And I have tried to find quicker ways of making this happen. And I have found ways of accelerating it, but not to truly just make it like a quick fix kind of scenario. There just isn't one, at least not that I can find. So then let's talk about the next phase, where I really started turning it around and learning some things to shift. And this time frame is from years 4 through 7 of my faculty job. So I started with several shifts away from the things that didn't work to things that did. Let's talk about a few of those. I can't talk about all of those just for time reasons. Shift number 1 is it's far more than tweaks. So again, I mentioned that I thought all I need is a few tweaks. And I really had to shift this into, first, getting a mentor who could give me deep and critical feedback. Deep and critical feedback. Now that is key. I had had other people who had given me input on my grant proposals before that, but they were competing and struggling to get funding as well. And they really didn't have anything exceptional. They got grants sometimes, and they got a lot of rejections. And so that's the kind of advice I had been getting before. What I mean by deep and critical feedback is there was somebody in my department who had had almost 0 rejections in his career, maybe 1 or 2, but almost none. And he taught the graduate student grant writing class at the time. His name was Dr. Marshall Edgell. He's now deceased. And he decided he would take me on as a project and give me the deep feedback as long as I could take some really sort of tearing apart. And he did tear things apart for me. I would go in with an Ames page thinking, this is a pretty good start. And it would come back redlined, like whole sections crossed out, and him telling me to start over and me going away from the meeting almost in tears. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. Deep critical feedback repeatedly over time. That's so important. Deep critical feedback repeatedly over time. Totally different than tweaks. And it's much more of an ego blow at first. But the good news is that in the end, my ego, who so much wanted to just get approval and be seen by my colleagues as successful, my ego won in the end because I was able to let my ego go during this period and accept the feedback and work on the feedback and then go back for more feedback and do that again and again and again. So I took those ego blows in the short term to get the big ego wins in the end of getting multiple R01s funded as a result of doing this. And that was a huge ego win. So in the end, my ego really did win, just it took a while. I had to be able to do this. So this deep overhaul of the approach took 3+ years. It wasn't just like all of a sudden like that. So it's very tempting to think that we're already good enough in highly competitive grants, but those, it's a professional's game that I already talked about that require a professional approach that takes time to develop over that. And and I had one more little point at the bottom, but this is like a very, very big point actually. So reviewer feedback is not helpful in doing this. It is all surface level. So the reviewers aren't there to make you a better grant writer. They are there to tell you why they made the decision that they did about the outcome of your particular proposal, to give you some feedback on that particular proposal, but not to make you a better grant writer. So they won't be telling you, and they often can't tell you, what it was in your proposal that actually caused the rejection. I mean, sure, they'll name some methods or techniques or something about it that they didn't like, and you might try to fix that, as many of us have done, and we go back, we try to address those comments, we try to fix them, and our scores stay the same or get worse. That happened to me with my NSF proposals during this period, where I listened to the reviewer feedback, I revised it accordingly, I thought it was much better, I resubmitted it, and my scores got worse. So they are not there to help you become a better grant writer. That is the key point. And if you are trying to base your grant writing development only upon reviewer feedback, you are missing so much in what it actually takes to be successful at this. And it probably won't make you a much better grant writer, at least not very quickly, because it just takes too long. Like you submit and then you wait for months, and then by then you've moved on to other submissions. Then it's like, oh, you get the feedback, and then you're probably, if you're like me, you're upset about it if it's a rejection, and you're like, oh, these stupid reviewers. And it's not at all a good way of advancing this. Okay, shift number 2. It pays to develop proposal ideas well in advance. So my before was I would start writing, 3 weeks or so before, and I wouldn't really think that much about it before that. After, I would take months or more to develop the big idea by iterating the Ames page. That was my initial strategy. That's no longer the strategy that I use with clients. There is a faster and better way than this, but that's the best strategy that I could come up with during that time, is spending those months and months developing that big idea by iterating the Ames page, writing long before the deadline. Sometimes as much as a year before, I would start thinking and drafting out a specific Ames page. There was no last minute rush. I remember for the third R01 that I submitted during this period, that we actually finished it about 3 days in advance of the deadline. And it was just bizarre. It was the weirdest feeling ever to not be rushing at the deadline, to just have it done and submitted. And it's like, what do I do now? Like, and I would read it and say, this is pretty good. I can't figure out what else to fix on this. So I guess it's done. It was just very weird and disturbing because all of my previous efforts had been always last minute. And so no last minute rush. So nice, so much more relaxing and clear and clarifying. And really the focus on quality over quantity. Now, one little story I want to tell you is in one case, I think it was actually that one that I just mentioned where we were ready ahead of time. I had intended to submit that the whole round before. In other words, 4 months beforehand, I had intended to submit that. And we got to about a week beforehand, and we were just working so hard to get some of the preliminary data and get the ducks in a row for this. And a little over a week beforehand, I just looked at it and said, I can't do the quality that I want to. And it wasn't an easy decision because, again, I had plenty of mouths to feed. By that point, I had already had some R01s, and so my staff had grown and had postdocs by that time and all of that. So I had mouths to feed, and my previous grant was running out. So this was supposed to be the replacement for the previous one running out. And I looked at the time frame, and I'm like, if I delay this submission until the next round of submission, then I will have one and only one chance to get this right before I run out of funding. That's it, if I delay it. So it was really tempting to just go ahead and submit a lower quality proposal. But I decided, nope, quality has always worked for me, ever since my turnaround. So I'm going to focus on just quality and postpone this a whole 4 months until February. I'm going to postpone it. And then I did postpone it, and it worked. This is one of the 4 in a row that I got funded without any revisions. So quality pays, quality works. Okay. All right. Shift number 3, developing the big idea that resonates with reviewers. So before, I would just think that I could throw a bunch of my ideas, because I had a lot of ideas that I would put on the page and say, these are pretty good ideas I'm sharing with you, reviewer. Why don't you like my good ideas? So I thought I could just throw all my brilliant ideas into the page, and they would recognize my genius. Doesn't quite work that way. I try to organize the ideas some. It wasn't just a total mishmash, but it also wasn't particularly focused. And afterwards, I would really work hard to find the one core big idea that is really going to resonate with likely reviewers and funders. That is the key shift here. It really requires understanding the audience and what that audience wants. We have to understand that. Otherwise, if we don't understand what they want, we're developing the big idea in a vacuum, and that's really no better than not having a big idea. Our big idea has to be tailored towards this audience. And then we write a very focused proposal around that one big idea, not multiple ideas. And for newer investigators, I've seen over the years, and this was me again too during the previous phase, it's so easy. It's so easy to just think, let's just throw in all of our best ideas because we have lots of good ideas. So why not? Why not throw those in there and impress the reviewer even more? No, it really doesn't work. The other point of this is that this is fundamentally a creative process, doing this, finding this big idea and iterating on it until it's really good. It's a creative process, and it takes time and iteration. It can't be rushed. So shift number 4 is then, once I landed upon the big idea, is being able to tell a reviewer-centric story about that big idea. So before, I used to think my science would speak for itself, and reviewers would clearly see how great my science was because, I was in the leading edge field of proteogenomic mapping. I had a background in bioinformatics when bioinformatics people were rare, working on proteomics and the Human Genome Project. It was all hot, leading edge science, and I was heavily recruited for faculty jobs. So I thought, obviously this is good science and it will speak for itself. No, it didn't speak for itself. And I thought, all I need to do in terms of writing is really just craft elegant prose, like become even better writer, because maybe my writing isn't good enough since I got rejected. So that's what I thought before. What I realized after shifting this is, more than anything, I need to speak plainly and clearly. Over elegance or over detail or over complication does not help in the grant proposal context. I simply need to tell an engaging story of the big idea. And this takes time and careful crafting. It can't be done at the last minute. So the real message or motto of this is engage your reviewer. Don't try to impress your reviewer. Engage, not impress. So if you think about your reviewer's life, they're actually, I think I have a slide about this. No, I don't actually. So if you think about your reviewer's life is busy. They've got lots to do. The reviewing process is stressful. And if you're just trying to impress them by putting all of your great ideas on the page and all the citations and references and using dense text with lots of acronyms and it's hard to wade through and understand to impress them, you are actually making it harder. You're making their job much harder and you are not engaging them. On the other hand, if you tell that nice story, a reviewer-centric story, then you engage them. And I'm going to get into just a little bit more detail on how to do these things in a bit. So stick around. We're not quite done yet. So what was the result of all of this? My next 4 R01 grant proposals were funded on the first submission. There were no more rejections, no more revisions of my R01s. I had smaller rejections of a few other things, but of my major federal efforts that I was leading of R01s, no more rejections. I felt more confident and happy about the submissions. And one of the things my colleagues would always come to me say, have you got your scores yet? Like, I just found out the scores have been reported. And I'm like, oh, there's scores? Well, I don't know. I don't really want to check those because who knows what they are. They could be good. They could be bad. But I knew that I had done a good job, and that's what counted because I just felt good. I'm like, okay, I know I did a good job, but they may not like it. I don't know. So I would wait a couple weeks, and then I would open up the scores, and for each one of these, I was like, I almost fell out of my chair when it was actually such a good score because I just was sort of detached at that point. I knew I had done it as good as I could, and I left it up to the reviewers to decide whether that was good enough. So I received more recognition and much less stress as a result of this. There were other stressors at that point in my career because once you have funding, then you've got to manage a bigger and bigger team, and there are stressors associated with that. But in terms of funding, I had much, much less stress. It was so relaxing to just go for like 6 or 8 months without working on any proposal at all and just focusing on the science and making sure the science was advancing. So when it came time to write the next proposal, that we actually had some good science to put in the proposal, because that still does matter. Even though that's not enough, it does matter. So some key points from this phase number 2 is it takes deep thought and time to discover that big idea, and you really have to craft an engaging reviewer-centric story of that big idea. Don't rush, and don't be a grant spammer. That's a real take-home message of a lot of this. So despite these successes, I still had more to learn. We always have more to learn in life, right? I mean, you're never at a point where you're just like, okay, I know everything, and so now I'm done. At least I hope you're not at that point. I'm certainly never at that point. So there were some things I still didn't know how to do. I couldn't create a quality proposal quickly coming out of this phase. It would take months of work to refine an aims page. And I lacked a repeatable system. It was more hinging on my intuition, on just having key clarity and giving it enough time so those moments of clarity would come to me. And it was pretty unpredictable. I also still mistakenly bought into the myth that I needed lots of preliminary data to be successful, even though one of my R01s had demonstrated that I really didn't need as much as people typically think. So I'd had one demonstration, but I thought, well, maybe that was just luck. Okay, well, it's not just luck. So part 3, next level success. And this was the time frame after 7 years in, and I'd had these R01s funded, and there were some new opportunities and new challenges. So the trial run of this came in 2009. So during 2009, here in the United States, there was the American Reinvestment and Redevelopment Act, or something like that, ARRA, and it was because of the economic disaster of 2008, the government was spending extra money on various projects, and some of those were directed towards science and the NIH, and they offered this opportunity, the RC2 or grant opportunities. And it was done with fairly short notice. It's like the overall award had 2 to 3 months of notice to apply for. But the problem with that was I didn't have the whole 2 to 3 months. I had much less time than that because I had worked on a specific aims page and then sent it to the program officer to say, hey, how's this? And so he said, let's get on a call. We got on a call. He gave me reams of feedback. I literally had about 4 pages of notes at the end of that phone call about what he wanted, because he basically said, you know, what you wrote here, that's not what I want. This is what I want. And he proceeded to tell me, and I wrote that down in detail. And so I rewrote that aims page with about a week and a half to go. I finally got to a point where it's like, okay, that's good, and then started writing the rest of the proposal in earnest. So the actual proposal was developed in about a week and a half. It was not my best writing, but it was good enough to get the funding because, you know, other people had limited timeframes too. So that was awesome to get $1.8 million out of that effort of direct cost funding. And this one was supposedly very highly competitive, although I don't know the particular statistics or odds on this one. I don't know how many other people applied for it. I just heard it was very hard to get these. So this success laid the foundation for the next bigger challenge. And I'll tell you, in terms of the next bigger challenge, some of what I learned from this. So here's the big one. Here's the core of our case study today. It was an opportunity to go for a U24 for up to $12 million as part of the CPTAC consortium in the National Cancer Institute. And that was in 2010 that they announced the second round of this program. So they had already run a first round of this CPTAC program for 5 years leading up to 2010 and had 5 members of the consortium who were funded with similar levels of funding. So this was a new competition that we heard rumors of that it was going to be coming out. So it was about mid-August that I started discussing it with colleagues that there was a rumored RFA that was going to be coming out. And so we started preparing for it to come out. And then it came out in early September of that year. And it was go time because we had under 30 days between when they did the RFA and when it was time to submit, under 30 days. And this was not just a 12-page proposal. It ended up being around 20, I think it was 25 pages of text in total. There were multiple sections, and I was just focused on the main front-facing section, the 6-page section that led the way. All right, so this was an awesome opportunity, but there were multiple challenges that we faced. We had a 2-university team with 2 of us at UNC Chapel Hill and 2 at Washington University, St. Louis, who hadn't worked together as a team. Like myself and my collaborator at UNC had worked together, and the 2 people at Washington University had worked together a little bit, but as a team, not at all. Okay, we had no preliminary data for this project, and we were competing with people who had 5 years in the project to generate preliminary data. We had a short timeline, as I mentioned, and this is duplicated here, so I guess it just reemphasizes the point. It was a short timeline, and it was a new field for us of cancer biomarkers. I hadn't done cancer biomarkers, and I think the only one on the team was one of the 4 PIs who'd done a little bit of work in biomarkers. He'd done more than a little bit, actually, but the rest of us had nothing to do with biomarkers. So it was, you know, we faced a lot of challenges, and even more than that, it was long odds. So they were only going to support 5 of these grants out of over 74 applications that were submitted for this from major consortia from almost every big name university that you can think of in the United States. So it's a success rate of just 7%. And to get funded, even more than that, we had to beat out one of the groups that had already been in the consortium for 5 years. My personal take is that the reason that they gave such a short time between releasing the RFA and then the time that the proposals were due is that they wanted the people who are already in the consortium to have a legs up so that the people already in it could stay in it for continuity. That's my best guess. I don't know for a fact. It's just a guess. And I'm not casting aspersions on anybody. I mean, it makes sense. If you have a consortium that's already there, you want to keep it going, that would be one way to do it. So we were true underdogs competing against the established big names in the consortia. And I really had to step up my game to have any shot whatsoever at this. So I did. So our overall approach is we dedicated 15 to 20 days to planning, and really during this 15 to 20 days, working on the big idea that I'll go more into detail in a moment, collecting preliminary data, and preparing for the RFA. And then we spent the 30 days actually writing once the RFA came out. And so the entire process was just over 45 days. And I led the writing of the big picture overview section, and then some of my colleagues wrote other sections and other parts of it. So new things that I had to learn to help make this happen, and some of the old things revisited as well. Okay, first of all, I had to learn how to make my process faster, because this thing of iterating for months on specific aims page, that would not work. So I have to get it done, and I have to get it done quickly. We needed a faster approach. So I really started developing a system that I have continued to develop since that time. And the system was pretty basic at the time. It was using mind maps to really map out our ideas and how they might fit together, and getting them all on the page and discussing them and iterating on the ideas to develop the core big idea of this proposal before we really started writing. And then taking the mind maps onto the specific aims page and trying to write the ideas out, seeing how it looked, and then from that saying, well, maybe that's not quite good enough, and then iterating back to the mind map and further working on the ideas there, bringing it back to a specific aims page and doing that. And it turns out that was a much tighter and faster iteration cycle than just iterating and writing, because writing presents unnecessary complexities of like fitting all the words together and making it sound nice and all of that kind of stuff, that when you're doing it on something like a mind map, you don't have those same complexities present. But you do have to learn how to think in terms of mind maps instead of thinking in terms of writing. So it is retraining for people who try to take this approach. And I had started working with mind maps a couple years before that, and so now I was becoming familiar with them and could do that. And of course, many discussions as we iterated between these, all with the goal of developing that great big idea in a short time frame. And I think it was that great big idea that was really the key to our success with this. Okay, so one thing that I just wanted to mention is we've recently distilled that process that I mentioned, that very rough process, into a much more refined and step-by-step process. It's the 4 Ps: preparation, play, resulting in the big idea, and from the big idea, planning. And by planning, I really mean planning out the story that you're going to write, the story layers, into performance, where you actually perform the writing that you're going to show to the reviewers in the end. And by breaking it down this way, it gives us much more time to play, to brainstorm, to iterate on our ideas in isolation from the writing. That's the key of this whole process, to brainstorm and play with our ideas in isolation to maximize our creative process to yield more predictable results, so we can get that big idea and then plan a story around it and write that story. So that's basically what that is. And I just wanted to give you that strategy because you can adopt this strategy and it will accelerate your efforts so much if you do so in the long run. I mean, you have to learn how to do the process, but once you do, it really pays off. All right, so how to be convincing with very limited preliminary data was a second challenge that we faced, because I was in this mode that everybody else is always in of, well, you need reams of preliminary data. Some people say, well, you have to have done like the first aim of the proposal before you can get funding to do the thing. Some people say you have to have done half or 2/3 of the work before you can get funding. I had sort of bought into some of those notions up to this point, but we couldn't do it for this proposal. We couldn't. All we could do was look at this and say, well, okay, if I were a reviewer, what would the big question marks be about our ability to do the work, to work together and get some kind of result? What would those question marks be? And what preliminary data that we can get right now on this short time frame that will best address those specific question marks? And that's what we did. We used that focusing strategy to define the specific preliminary data, and then we got at it. We worked hard, dropped everything else, and we're passing data back and forth. And at the time, it was really hard. The internet was much more limited, but we made it work and got very specific, focused preliminary data. It wasn't reams and reams of data, but it was enough. We told the best story we could with what we had. And like I said, I'd seen this work before, at least once. And so I was like, wait, maybe this whole thing about needing reams of preliminary data isn't actually true. And since that time in working with clients, by the way, I have seen that actually too much preliminary data is a trap. I have seen more than one client who has gotten to a point where they put too much preliminary data in the proposal and they get a pretty good score, but reviewers are like just not that excited because they're like, well, you've basically already done the work, so this is kind of boring now. And it's heartbreaking to see somebody put so much work into it and then have reviewers say, well, you've done too much now and it's boring. So a third thing is how to create a convincing collaboration in a very short time. So we had to go from, we don't have time to do much, to we'll do whatever it takes. And this is kind of related to the preliminary data one, but it's a separate thing. Like, we had to figure out, how do we create a convincing collaboration? How do we gather the best evidence of that? How can we show that we can work together? And we really emphasized setting up a regular meeting structure as we were preparing this proposal, and doing trips back and forth, and setting up team members working with one another to really show that we could collaborate, even though it was only a month and a half of actual collaboration leading up to it, to show that, hey, we can figure it out, we can do this. So all of those shifts and learnings resulted in an overall success rate of over 52 percentile. And this slide is kind of out of order here. I meant for this to go later. It just didn't end up going later. So, but since I'm on it, this is kind of a key thing, because yes, we did get that funded, and I'm going to go into a little bit more training, just a little bit more about some details of the big idea and the story in a moment. But overall, by making these shifts that I've shared with you so far, it led to a success rate of over 52%. Now, when I calculated this, it was actually higher than 52%. I just don't remember the exact number. It was something like 58%, and I don't want to overinflate, so I just reduced the number to 52%. So I know it was higher than 52% for sure. And even if it was only 52%, that is 4.5 to 5-fold higher than the average success rate that I was able to achieve. I basically could know that of every proposal that I submitted during that time period, that I had over 50% chance of it being funded. Wouldn't that be nice if you could do that? And I'm not saying you can do exactly that, because again, I was in the right field at the right time, but wouldn't it be nice to have higher than background odds? Because background is like 1 in 10. That's kind of sucky to have to write 10 proposals to only get 1 funded, and that's on average. That's if you're average, and it's a professional sport these days, so average is actually pretty good at this time. So being 4.5 to 5-fold better than the average, These shifts made all the difference. It wasn't something fantastical that I was doing, some miraculous genius that I have. It was applying all of these shifts that I've talked about that led to this. And you can do it too. So here's what we ended up submitting. I just wanted to give you a brief overview so you can see a little bit what it looks like. This is the specific aims page. It just starts out, you might not be able to read this. Biomarkers hold great promise to provide early diagnostics for cancer that can be used to treat the disease before it progresses. However, biomarker research based on proteomic discovery platforms hasn't yet lived up to this promise because changes in proteins that occur in the presence of cancer are often myriad, with each having only a minor correlation with the presence or absence of disease. So also consistency across studies has been poor, and so on and so forth. So it's basically building the case at the beginning that biomarkers to that point in time hadn't been a very reliable method of discovering or finding cancers and needed to be better. So that's the specific aims page that I spearheaded. This is the start of the section. I'm not showing the whole section here. And this is the core figure that resulted in our big idea work, resulted from our big idea work that shows the overall process that we were following and just really lays it out for the reviewer, for the reader, as to what we're talking about in terms of why this biomarker problem is so challenging. So what we were doing here is really using this big idea to lay out what is the true problem? What is the problem beneath the problem? So the problem, the surface level problem, is biomarkers don't work very well. And we were laying out the problem beneath that, which is that actually, if we have an aberration on the chromosomes, it goes through all of these different biological processes before it shows up as a peak on a mass spectrum. And that means those peaks can be highly variable in where, when, and how they show up. That was basically the message of this. And that's a part of the big idea. So let's dive just a little bit deeper so you can learn something about how a big idea is constructed and the story is constructed of that big idea. So you can see how they work together in this proposal. So first of all, I haven't yet defined the big idea, so I'm doing it now. Yay. So what is a great big idea? It's really a concise, focused core idea of the proposal, of what is this proposal about. And the easiest way I've found to define it is the big idea is equal to the big promise plus the unique mechanism. It's just a way of breaking it down. So the big promise, well, I'll go into that in a moment. In fact, instead of defining it to you now and then redefining it on the next slide, I'll just define it on the next slide, what the big promise and unique mechanism is. So right here, big promise. The big promise of your work in any proposal is really that outcome that you're committing to achieving, to trying to achieve, to doing your very best. To try to achieve that outcome is what I'm trying to say. So it defines that specific impactful result that your project is going to make, and it defines why it matters to the field, especially, and beyond. Now, a lot of people think that, especially if you're new to the grant writing thing, that the most important sense of impact is like, how is it going to impact health? And how is it going to impact the world, and solve this health problem? And yes, that's important, but that's kind of old news to many of your reviewers who already understand, like if you have some cure or some new insight to a mechanism of cancer or a biomarker for cancer, they already understand the implications of that in the big picture health concern problem. They've heard it a million times. So that's not really new to them. Your big idea needs to be something that's new to them. And so the big promise is more directed at the field level than it is the big picture health problem, unless it's some very unique health or other. If you're in the engineering sciences, you may not be working on health problems, but maybe you're working on computer science problems or solar problems. And still, you're often directing that more at the field. So it highlights how the outcome will advance the field, solving critical challenges and setting the stage for broader real-world impact. And it really gives this compelling value proposition of like, hey, if you invest in me to do this work, you as a field and you as the funder are going to get something big back in return. So here's the example from the U24 that showed on the screen and then unshowed. Oh yeah, I really want to show this. So, okay, let's see if I can just exit the presentation temporarily to actually, that got me in the wrong place. Okay, here we go. I don't know why that wasn't showing on the screen, but it says here, the project combines an inside-out genome to proteome approach, which identifies cancer-related proteomic changes driven by key genomic alterations such as somatic mutations and gene rearrangements, with an outside-in proteome to genome strategy that maps observed proteomic changes back to their underlying genetic mutations. This bidirectional strategy, leveraging advanced mass spectrometry, xenograph models, and high-throughput genomic tools, enables the discovery of biomarkers with stronger mechanistic links to cancer, overcoming the limitations of correlation-based methods. So I realized as I was reading it that I was reading the unique mechanism, not the big promise. So I'm sorry for any confusion about that, because my slides landed me in the wrong place. So that is the unique mechanism. So let me define the unique mechanism. Since I just read the unique mechanism example, let me define that, and then I will go back to the big promise example. So the unique mechanism is about how that big promise will be delivered. It's the specific approach or method that explains how it will be achieved. It really sets your approach apart. It highlights what makes your method or your approach distinct. Like if other people have tried this and are failing to deliver this big promise, why is your approach going to deliver it where others haven't? So it's often at the core of your innovation, this unique mechanism. And it combines new insights, technologies, strategies, or people or resources to really solve this problem in a new way. So again, that's the example from the U24. Back to the big promise. The big promise example is this proposal addresses the long-standing challenge in cancer biomarker research, where statistical methods over the past decade have produced unreliable biomarkers due to reliance on correlations without mechanistic insight. By focusing on key genomic changes, such as somatic mutations and gene rearrangements that correlate with cancer, this project uses proteogenomic approaches to map these changes to proteomic alterations, uncovering mechanistic links between biomarkers and cancer. This approach aims to identify more reliable biomarkers for early detection, timely interventions, and improved patient outcomes. Awesome. So that's the example from that. One quick note is I actually used AI to produce these big promise statements from my specific aims page. And I've been developing a little GPT and chat GPT that's like the big promise analyzer and generator. And at some point I may be sharing that. It's not quite ready for prime time, but it's kind of a fun little tool. It won't generate a great big promise for you, but it will take text and extract the big promise from text that you have and summarize it like this. And so it's a pretty cool thing. All right, so then we can combine those. Hopefully the example works again if I go back to the presentation mode. Okay, so the big idea, we combine these into that core big idea. It's really the core of your proposal. It shows why this proposal matters, why this proposal stands out, and how it will succeed. And it drives the field and the broader impacts. So if you don't get this big idea nailed, which is that combination of big promise and unique mechanism, then you probably don't have a proposal to stand on. One of the things I've been telling clients in my classes recently is that you can have a proposal that's well written, super well written, even tells a really good story, but doesn't have a very compelling big idea for that audience, and you're very unlikely to get funded with that. But you can have a great big idea with a relatively poor written proposal. I mean, I still don't suggest doing poor writing because it increases your odds to do better writing, but you can have one that has a great big idea, and as long as reviewers can pick up on what the big idea is, and then through the reading, the writing doesn't matter as much, and you can get funding. So the big idea is really important. It's a necessary condition to funding. I went back and looked at all of my successful proposals, and I could easily identify a clear big idea. That's why I even developed the GPT, the AI tool to do this, is so I could analyze past proposals and some of the ones in our grant library that has been submitted by clients of ours as examples. So here's that example from the U24. This proposal addresses a critical challenge in cancer biomarker research where over the past decade, statistical methods have often produced unreliable biomarkers due to their reliance on correlations without mechanistic insight. By focusing on key genomic changes, such as somatic mutations and gene rearrangements known to correlate with cancer, we use novel proteogenomic approach that combines inside-out strategy with outside-in analysis. This bidirectional mapping, supported by advanced mass spectrometry, xenograph models, and high-throughput genomic tools, uncovers the mechanistic links between biomarkers and cancer, enabling the identification of more reliable biomarkers for earlier detection, timely interventions, and ultimately improved patient outcomes. So that's the big idea. I mean, it ultimately, at the end of the big idea statement here, it ties it back into that bigger picture world outcome, which is good. But most of it is really focused on the field level impact of let's make biomarkers more reliable. And we have a way of looking at this problem, a way of doing that that is unique. And the other thing about this big idea is that this was custom tailored to the audience. I think I have a slide about that, but I just want to make that point in case I don't. It was custom tailored to the audience. It's not just some vague general big idea that's designed for any audience. No, it's designed for that specific RFA and that specific reviewer audience. Okay, and we always want to do that with our big ideas. So why this big idea worked in this case? Well, we spent a lot of time analyzing and understanding the RFA to figure out what they really wanted. And that's not so easy. If you've been around for a while and you've studied requests for applications, that's what RFA stands for, in case I didn't say that. If you've been around for a while and read some of these, some are pretty clear and well written, and some are not so clear. And what are they actually talking about here? What do they actually want from us? And that was the case with this one. The first time I read it, I'm like, what do they want? Like, I don't get it. Like, they're making connections between proteogenomics and biomarkers, and it was like really unclear. So we spent a lot of time clarifying for ourselves what we thought they meant, and then clarifying that into our big idea, and then in our writing, re-clarifying that. So I just have this little side note here for you, a little short, very short side lesson, but an important one, that a lot of us, I've seen this with clients over the years, sort of assuming that if you see a request for applications that says, hey, we're announcing this program and you could apply for grants on this topic, and here's what this is for. So you see that and you say, wait, yay, I'm going to apply for a grant for that. It's easy and tempting to think, well, your reviewers who read your grant will have carefully read that RFA and, key point, understood the purpose, and they will bring that understanding into the reviewing. So therefore, in your writing, you don't have to, do any heavy lifting of explaining what this is about. You just assume that they already know what it's about, and then you just dive into your particular stuff. Nope, doesn't work, because it relies on too many assumptions of the reviewers, program officers, and everybody operating in some kind of ideal way, that they would have the ideal knowledge that you can rely upon. No, you've got to do the work of explaining to them the purpose of this work. Even if the purpose was stated in the RFA, you still have to explain the purpose. It's such a key point, and it's really part of why this big idea worked and why we were successful here, is because we did that. Other applicants did not. We did that. It's a key point. Okay, so then once we have that big idea, we have to really tell that clear and engaging story of that great big idea. And how we do that, I've developed, back in 2020, I developed this this whole tool called the Grant Story Funnel, and I should have labeled it here, but I did not. It's called the Grant Story Funnel. I analyzed successful proposals, both from myself and multiple clients who'd submitted examples of successful proposals, and broke it down into what are the key layers that are present in almost all of these successful proposals. What are the key layers of the story, and what is the typical order of these layers of the story? And by the way, a great story always has layers. A great story isn't just a bunch of facts on the page. That's called descriptive text, and descriptive text is not a story. A story is a story of motion, of movement, of things happening, of where the field is at, and what are the roadblocks in the field, and how does your work fit into those roadblocks. That's what I mean by story. Descriptive is just like, oh, I've got this interesting idea about this interesting problem over there, and here's how the idea will solve that. That's not a story. Or maybe it could be considered a very, very, very short story, but not a very good story. So this breaks it down into all of these layers, like the hook. The hook is that opener for your grant proposal that really gets the reader engaged and wanting to read more. And then the elaboration on why this problem that you're going to be addressing, or this question, is important to the field. And then introducing the paradigm for the solution, and what is that paradigm, what's been happening with it, what's missing in that paradigm such that it needs more work. Then a deeper exploration that you've done, whether it's literature search or actual preliminary data, a deeper exploration that you've done to try to find a solution to what's missing that hints that you could actually have a solution. What's still missing, such that you need funding to do something about this. This is such a key layer that so many people leave out of their proposals, the what's still missing layer. Don't leave it out. That's a big recommendation there. And then the what, which is your objective or your hypothesis. Often we have a little statement about, it's like a trust and authority building statement about you and your team. And then we have an aims lead in, and then the aims themselves broken down into an aim objective and an aim methods. And then finally ending after the aims often with an impact statement. Not all of my successful proposals had this, but some of them did, and I typically recommend doing it. How does successful completion fit into the bigger picture? So that's the grant story funnel in a very quick nutshell. Now, I've taught whole classes on this, so I mean, there's a lot more to it than just like running through it like that, but I wanted to give you a sense of it so you can start understanding some of the layers of the story you're going to have to build to be successful at this kind of level, or even just for regular R01s. This was based on analyzing my successful R01s. I had done this intuitively. I just didn't have a system at the time. It was all based on intuition. And the training that I had received from my mentor as well. That was a big piece too. So anyway, and this is how it maps over to this project. Now you see these white blank spaces. That's because these white parts on this specific aims page of the U24 were parts that were required on the specific aims page for the U24 that introduced the other parts of the proposal that the reviewer would read separately. So these were just introducing those other parts of the proposal, but the rest of it followed the grant story funnel quite well. Okay, before I even knew specifically what the grant story funnel was. All right, so a layered story that is engaging to your reviewer. That is the key point. So to be highly competitive, your proposal must have a strong and resonant big idea with a clear, engaging story of that big idea for your reviewers. And though it's a creative process that can take time and can take many iterations, we can speed that process up with experience to allow the creation of that impactful big idea without the long months of iteration. So those 9 years of experience that I had leading up to preparing this proposal allowed me to really bypass all of that lengthy iteration and make this happen fast enough to make it successful. So having a system and the right tools really helps, and developing those skills over time, really diving in and committing to developing those skills. Because that's what I did at that point, right before phase 2, where I was desperate, where I was frustrated. That's when I made the commitment to myself. I'm going to change everything about my grant writing process. This is not working. I do not want to have a career of decades of endless rejection with maybe an occasional success here and there. That's not the kind of science career that I wanted to have. It just wasn't worth it to me. So I was either going to figure it out or just not do the science career. So that's the commitment that I made to really changing this, and that commitment really paid off. So let's actually go forward in our story here. So how do you use this to your advantage? Well, so the keys to this are really developing the big idea and writing an engaging story about it, taking the time to learn how to do this properly. It can't be rushed, not until you have the experience where you can rush it like we did in the case study. And it can be sped up if you have the right system in place, but it's still not going to be like fast typically until you're really good at it. And I just found all along the way, both in grant writing and in other aspects of my career, both my science career and now in my business of helping other people, helping other researchers, which is this business that I have made extensive use of outside mentors, extensive use. And I would not be here today talking to you about this case study if it weren't for all of the mentors that I've engaged, both some free and many of them paid mentors that got me here today. And getting that deep mentoring with this particular process is essential. Like that deep, insightful feedback, like trying to create that grant story funnel. The reason I didn't go into more detail is I've seen people try to do it on their own, and it's really, really hard. It's really hard without feedback to get all of those layers just right and lined up. It's one of the most difficult things. So that mentoring is essential. So now, to wrap up, I'll just share a few resources with you. Before I do that, I just want to say, pause and think about when I went back and looked at this case study, I was like, wow, we actually did that. And I hadn't really thought it. I had just dismissed it over the years. I'm like, oh yeah, we got that funded. Okay, next thing. That's kind of how I've always operated. I'm on to the next thing, thinking about the next thing, and not stopping and celebrating the wins. So this was a really interesting process for me to go back and look at this and really think about what it took to make it happen. And it really was miraculous, but it wasn't a miracle in the sense of like there wasn't anything scientific there about it. It was so cool to tease this apart and figure out there were actually multiple learnable things here that I could share with you, that we can all learn from this and see how this could be potentially repeated in the future. I mean, even again, if you can't repeat something quite as far out as this, how we can apply them to regular everyday grants to make those easier and faster. And so I just really appreciate getting the chance to share this and wanted to pause before I wrap up here. All right, so I have a couple resources to help you apply this. So the first one of those is the Grant Foundry Accelerator Program. So the Grant Foundry Accelerator Program is a program that we designed to address exactly that system that I talked about, to help our clients, to help people who come to us who say, I want to get a faster result in doing this. I don't want to mess around for years, many years, with rejections and trying to figure it out. I actually just want the more direct path and want to learn this stuff and put that in place so that I can get repeatable success. And that's what we designed Grant Foundry Accelerator for. So it's a one-on-one mentoring and work with you program. So we work with you on your proposal with the goal, not just of creating a better proposal, but the real goal is to help you learn this approach, learn this system, learn how to create better big ideas and write better stories about them, and do that in a way that's repeatable so that you can apply the lessons from this webinar. And the program is really ideal for people who are ready to put the concepts taught today immediately to work for you. So if you've had some rejections and you're getting tired of that, and you're just really like, I want to take a bit of time here to really make a shift, and to do that in the most reliable way that I can, then this program is for you. Or maybe you haven't applied yet, you're starting a new faculty job, or want to enhance your grant writing, and you're just ready to really start out on the right foot rather than, going through all of the rejections first. Either way, this program would be for you in those cases. It's designed by researchers for researchers. And that's such a key point. When it comes to grant work, there are people who teach about the writing, and that's okay. But as I said earlier, it's not just the writing. It's not elegant writing. It's not just any typical writer off the street can do this, not even remotely do this, because this is really about the science in the end. It's not about the writing in the end. It's about proposing great science. That's what the big idea is about. So it's even figuring out what is great science to propose. What does great science look like? And how do I find great science that matches the expectations or exceeds the expectations of this reviewer community that I'm going to? And understanding what that takes and understanding what communities want, that's a key part of this. And then once you've figured out that part, then how do I turn that into a story? Not just elegant writing, but a clear, compelling, concise story that resonates with this audience. And I've just found that people who are from outside of actually having been a researcher have a lot of trouble figuring that out. So it's designed to really help you put all of those right skills into place so that you have a repeatable system, and in doing so, have more confidence about your submissions, enjoy the grant preparation process more. I love all of the clients who've come back to me over the years and saying one of the big changes that I helped them make was that they now actually enjoy the grant writing process when previously it was miserable for them, to create better, clearer, and more impactful big ideas, and to tell more engaging stories for your reviewer. So really our overall goal is to spend less time writing proposals and more time focusing on what matters, your research, building your team, and getting your manuscript out in the wild. And that's exactly the result I got after I committed to making a big change and spent several years making the change. Then I was at the point where I had enough funding that I could relax for periods of 6 or 8 months to just focus on the research. It was so awesome. And I want that for you as well. It is possible. You can do this, but you have to find a way to commit to it. And the GFA is one potential way of doing that we offer to you to help you. And who it's for is people who want a faster path to repeatable success, for people who understand the best and most important things in life come from commitment and investment in them. Our society has a lot of people who are just looking for quick fix, quick and easy success. And in my experience, I'm getting old enough that I've tried again and again to make things happen quickly, to get quick successes. And occasionally you get short, ephemeral wins. But lasting success comes from really committing and investing in the thing that you care about. And so if you care about grant writing, then this is for you. If you don't care about investing and committing to it, then it might not be for you. So really, it's for people who want more satisfying confidence building approach to getting the funding that you need to run your lab. And you can find out more, by the way, at this link that's just scifoundry.com/GFA info. And so I also have one other resource for you that I promised at the beginning, and I wanted to fulfill that promise. And so resource number 2 is the written version of this webinar. I often get people asking for the slides or things like that, and what I'm doing instead, even better, is turning this into a written PDF report that you can get for free that will summarize everything I covered here. And you can get that for free by going to scifoundry.com/researchers/ 10-million-report/get-your-report. Get-your-report. And you'll have to opt in there because we don't have the report done yet. So that puts you on the waiting list for the report. And then once you've opted in, we will send you an email right away when that's done. It's probably 2 to 4 weeks from now that will be done, because I've got a lot on my plate at the moment. So that'll be awesome, though, that you can get this all in written form and you can see the examples, like study the examples and all of that. Okay, so now it's your turn. Go forth, have more impact and fun with less sacrifice and stress. That's really my overall motto at this point in life in helping researchers, because I ultimately figured it out to the point that I was having more impact and fun in my career with less of the sacrifice and stress. But I see so many people struggling with that. They struggle to work hard and face tons of rejections and work so hard all the time, and then the impact is just kind of minor and they don't get much recognition. It's not very satisfying to have low impact and lots of stress. That's not a very satisfying way to do that. So we want to flip it on its head. That's our mission in life, to have it more impact, less stress. I just can't emphasize that point enough. It's such an important thing. I'm third in a generation of scientists, or in a third generation in a line of scientists, and I really care about it. I lost my father to a stress-related disease. So I hope you'll go forth and do that. And now is time for any questions. We have burned up a lot of time today. So I'll just take one or two if we have them, and we will proceed from there. So let's see what we've got going on. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you want me to read them for you so you don't need to go into the chat?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi guys, Gabriel here. I'm gonna help Morgan here with the questions. So let us start with the first one that I think is very important. But then one of the the people attending wants to know which ones, if the 10 million grant that you got funded is the one that you first decided not to submit and then thought about resubmitting and did it later. Was that the one you were referring to?
So that was during the phase 2, which was where I made the first shifts, and that was referring to the third R01 of 4. So it was a renewal R01 that was, my initial R01 had only been for 3 years, because that's all I asked for. So I had 3 years of funding, and it was already starting, like by year 2 of that initial R01, I was like, oh wait, I have to start writing to get the next round of funding for this. Otherwise, I'll be out of funding. So we didn't have much preliminary data at that. And that's the one that I finished about 3 days beforehand and was just sitting around, what do I do? And that one I did submit. It came back funded, first round of submission, a 3.2 percentile score with no revisions or anything like that. So hopefully that answers the question.
Awesome. I think that answer was quite good. Here is another biggie. When we speak about the grant story funnel, would you say that all steps are mandatory? Do they need to be followed like strictly in order?
I would say yes and no. Okay, so let me refine my answer. In terms of, are they all mandatory? They are mandatory in the sense that if your reviewer does not get a sense of what each one of those layers does, if you do not create that impression in their mind that that layer is designed to create, then it's much less likely that you're going to succeed. So they're mandatory in that sense. Now, sometimes, in terms of practicality, sometimes the one or several of those layers aren't explicitly written out as a layer in the story. They're kind of implied, and the reviewer can, by reading, gather the implication from reading the whole aims page and be clear on what that is. So an example, one of my successful R01 proposals was missing the what's still missing layer, which I said is really important. But it showed up in one of the specific aims, that what's still missing layer showed up there sort of by implication that, here's something we clearly need to work on. And so the reviewer just has to get in the end what those things are. But my suggestion to you is that it's much better to be sure that they'll get it by actually having each of those layers on the page. So that's what I mean by mandatory. You at least have to create the Well, I did answer that earlier. I'm happy to answer that again because it's such an important question. So my answer to that was that it's a game of numbers. Like, well, okay, so let's actually think about the numbers. I've done the math on this. So it's not even odds. It's like the example that I said about basketball. Not every team has the same odds. So yes, every game of basketball is about the numbers. It's who makes more hoops in the allotted period of time. So it's a game of numbers. Right. But some teams are better than other teams. Like, they can have bad days. They can miss shots. They can, have all sorts of problems. But it's not just basketball. The sport of basketball isn't just a lottery. It's not just even odds for everybody, because some teams have practiced and done a much better job, so they have higher odds. Okay, so if you do the math on this, if you apply the same principle to grant proposals,
Awesome.
and it does apply, that yes, there's some
answer, and we
randomness
have
in the
one
system,
other question that
but
is
some
related to
proposals
the DFA
definitely
programs,
have higher odds
which
than others.
they
I
asked,
got 4
will the
RO1s
GFA program
in
work
a
if
row
they
without
on
a
one
single
specific
rejection.
proposal?
Then I
And
got
what
an
does it look like?
RC2, and then
Or
I got
does the
this
program
rare
grow through a series
U24.
of workshops and
If you do
seminars?
the odds, the statistical odds
Yeah,
on
so
that
we work
happening, it's
one-on-one with
remote.
one
It's
client
extremely
on one
remote
single
by
proposal.
just pure chance that I would do that. I mean, maybe I'm the luckiest person on the planet. That could be, but I don't think so from the rest of my life. So there was some quality there that skewed the odds in my favor and our team's favor. So if we think about, like, let's say you have typical odds of getting a proposal funded. That means at NIH, let's just take the number of 1 in 10, a 10 percentile pay line. Now, some institutes have higher pay lines, some lower than that. Like at NCI and NIAID, it can go as low as 7 to 8 percentile pay line, which is more like 1 in 12. We'll just take 1 in 10 odds. So if you have average odds, you will have to submit, on average, 10 proposals before you get one funded. 10 actually pretty good proposals to get one funded, if it's just even odds. Okay, so that's a lot of proposals to have the funding that you need, and they have to be pretty good, even to just be average. Like, average is actually pretty good. So you're doing a lot of pretty good proposals, a lot of hard work to do pretty good proposals to get 1 in 10 of them funded. That's an extremely large amount of work. Now, as I showed you, I had over 52% success rate after my turnaround. Before that, if you count the period before that, I was below 50. But after that turnaround, I had over 50% success rate. So that's better than 1 in 2 chances. So that meant that me, in my career, I got to write 2 proposals, and of each 2 proposals I wrote, I got more than 1 of them funded on average. That's like a huge difference, because that allowed me to spend, if I had a year of time, let's say, to work on it, where I just needed to get funding, period. I could either, with those kind of odds, with that kind of quality, I could spend that year focused on just 2 proposals and be reasonably sure I would get one funded. If I hadn't worked on the quality and I was in the old-fashioned mode of just submitting, like I talked about in my phase number 1 of my career, then I would have to submit 10 proposals of still pretty good quality during that year in the hopes of getting one funded on average. And again, it's not a sure thing, but just to at least have a reasonable shot like this could happen. Okay, so 10 proposals in a year of reasonable quality, of competitive quality, that's hard. That's extremely hard. And doing that year after year
Awesome. We
is
have two very
extremely,
short ones, so I
extremely
think we can
hard.
wrap it up.
So
One of
I
those
am
is
not
to
at
say the
all
grand
a
story
fan
funnel
of
is
that
applicable
approach.
to
I
both
think that's,
NSF
you know,
and
that
NIH.
conventional wisdom is one of the worst pieces of conventional wisdom that I hear repeated over and over again in academia. And I think it is like the killer. I think it is, it kills people's careers to be on this endless churn of grant proposals with the thought that each grant proposal is like a lottery ticket. And it ultimately amounts to grant spamming. And I'm not picking on the person who asked the question. I don't even know the name of the person who asked the question. I'm not picking on you in particular. I am railing against and ranting against this overall mindset in academia that actually, you know, academia, we're supposed to be smart people, right? We're supposed to be researchers. We're supposed to understand numbers. But this idea that it's just you know, punch your lottery ticket and just submit it,
Awesome. And
it
one and the
defies
one
the actual
final note
numbers.
would
I did a
be,
calculation
what would you
once
say to people who
based
get the
upon
repeated
1 in 10 odds
answer of
versus 1 in
these
2
again
odds
numbers? You just need to
and how
submit
much
more.
time you would have
What
to
would you say?
spend. And even if you spend a lot more time on those proposals that are 1 in 2 odds, you still save a tremendous amount of time in the end by having higher quality proposals versus the lower quality proposals that have longer odds. So I just really encourage everybody listening to this to get out of the mode that you just have to punch the lottery ticket. No, I mean, yes, you do have to submit occasionally, but try to submit the best you can and then do that repeatably. Okay? Do that repeatably, but not as often as you would just be punching those tickets. The other side effect I mentioned earlier that I'll just reiterate is that if you have to write 10 proposals to get one funded or more, you will be creating an impression in your study section. If you're going back to the same study section or same review panel, you know, after they've seen like 8 of them and rejected them, and here's the 9th one coming in, guess what they're going to feel when that reviewer opens that up? It's like, oh, another one from so-and-so. Ugh, you know, do I have to really wade through another one of these? Like, do you really want your reviewer to have that impression of your proposals? I only got one triage proposal ever. One triage ever. And that was enough for me to say, no more. I'm not going to do it again. Every one of my proposals that I submit are going to at least be taken seriously. And I got to the point where I knew that would be the case, where I knew at least they would be taken seriously. I would suggest everybody should be trying to go for that. And our whole system would be working better because there would be less lower quality proposals in the mix, a smaller number of higher quality proposals in the mix, and then pay lines would actually get better. So I could go on and on about that, but I won't go any further. Hopefully you get the point of this message. I just don't believe that philosophy. I think it's a very damaging philosophy.
I think that's good enough. And with that, we can wrap up the webinar. Thank you everyone for attending. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Just go out and find ways to have more impact with less sacrifice, with less stress, and learn to enjoy this grant writing process. It really can be enjoyable developing that big idea and writing a great story about it. And I'd love to help you with that if or when it comes the time for you.